Greetings, dear friends. You're on the Ruslan Belov channel. Today is Wednesday, August 26th, and we'll be discussing the situation on the fronts of the Ukrainian war, and at the end we'll go over the strikes on the rear areas. Because over the past 24 hours, an enormous number of events have taken place along the line of contact, and in the rear, new settlements were captured, and fierce fighting has begun in a completely new sector of the front, and it's likely that Korean fighters are already involved there, something insiders from Kiev recently reported. Let's start in the north. On the Sumy axis, in the area of the Sumy security zone, the fighting has only intensified. Russia is using the Thousand Cuts tactic. A new sector of the front has opened, and the Russia-Ukraine border is turning into torn shreds. In Sumy region, there are major Russian advances in 3 sectors, which may mean that Russia will soon seriously move toward blockading the regional capital with an attempt to capture it. Let's look at the map of the situation just north of Sumy. Russia has already invaded in 4 or 5 places there, and now there's a new incursion. Just northwest of Sumy, Russian armed forces invaded Ukrainian territory and within a matter of hours expanded their zone of control near the settlement of Bunyakin by 5 square kilometers. It's safe to say this is a new front sector along the border. Wherever the Russians have broken through here, they haven't retreated afterward. For Ukraine, this is bad news. Reserves are already in short supply. There is data suggesting that Russia is actively using Korean fighters in this sector who are recently transferred to Bryansk and Kursk regions. Well, I think we'll find out soon. We'll keep a close eye on this sector, and so you can get this kind of hot news instantly, subscribe to the channel. A bit to the southeast, Russian armed forces personnel took control of and filmed footage on the western outskirts of Kontrativka. Russian forces expanded their zone of control in the settlement by up to 1.5 kilometers and took new positions in a complex of agricultural buildings. The settlement of Pisarivka has also come under Russian control. Ukrainian defenses in the Sumy sector have weakened over the past day. Fighting is already underway at a very important defensive hub, Katyn. Just look at the map, only 10 kilometers remain to the city limits. The situation looks dire. For Kyiv, Sumy realistically has every chance of ending up under blockade by the end of the year, and fighting could begin in the city itself. Meanwhile, Zelensky is doing PR at the stellar entrance to Zaporizhzhia. Episodes like this are largely becoming possible because of a shortage of personnel in the Ukrainian armed forces and an insufficient number of troops directly on the front line. The modern nature of combat, where drones play a huge role, is gradually changing the structure of defense. Individual positions increasingly rely on reconnaissance and target destruction by drones, while there aren't enough people for full coverage. That's why infiltration by small groups into the rear is becoming an increasingly real threat. And right up to the very outskirts of Sumy, there are only dense forests. It's quite easy to hide from drones there and to advance. And judging by everything, this is far from the only such case that may happen before the end of the year. A bit further southeast, there's another sector where Russian assault troops took control of more than 5 square kilometers over the past day. The trend here is obvious: the creation of a buffer zone on the border with Ukraine. Sumy could realistically end up in a catastrophic position by the end of the year. Let's move on to Kharkiv region, to the area of Veliki Borluk. There we have serious changes. Russian forces have essentially begun a full blockade of the salient located north of Blahodatne and Nefedivka. The shortage of reserves on the Ukrainian side is also affecting things here. Prikolodne, Sliznov and Lozova are constantly under Russian aerial bomb and missile strikes. Just look at these strikes. The glide bombs are literally leveling everything to the ground. I don't think there's any resistance left in this sector after that. While Ukraine shows PR footage of strikes on Russian marketplaces, Russian bombs are simply wiping Ukrainian positions off the map along the entire front line. Kyiv urgently needs to change its strategy because, dear viewers, you can see the changes on the map for yourselves every day. The Ukrainian armed forces still have nothing to counter the Russian strikes in this sector, even though the Russian offensive here has noticeably slowed. In Krasny Liman and Kupyansk, positional fighting continued over the past day without major territorial changes, but Russian units are conducting mop-up operations in both sectors, effectively already preparing to push further west from these directions. Against the backdrop of what's happening in the north and in Donbas, cities like Kupyansk and Krasny Liman may seem insignificant, although strategically they're located in a very advantageous position for Kiev. Now let's move down to Donbas, where brutal, grinding battles are underway. In recent days, Russia has also significantly intensified shelling of Slovyansk using multiple rocket launch systems and drones, which has led to serious infrastructure destruction. According to local authorities, a mass evacuation is underway. The population of Slovyansk has shrunk to roughly 25,000 people. Before the war, the city's population was 105,000. Since the beginning of August, nearly 8,000 civilians have evacuated from the Slovyansk area. Russian forces expanded their zone of control on the northern approaches to the settlement of Mykolaiivka by up to 1 kilometer and took new positions north of the residential area, while several square kilometers to the south also came under Russian control. In Kramatorsk, there's been a lull over the past day, but that probably won't last long. Meanwhile, the town of Drushkivka, which directly borders it, is taking the brunt of it right now. Let's look further at the Drushkivka area. There, Russian air forces are simply flattening entire blocks of the city with aerial bombs, not letting Ukrainian fighters lift their heads. Russian drones are constantly circling over the city, hunting Ukrainian vehicles. The city is effectively partially blockaded, and a full evacuation of the remaining civilians is underway. It's only 2 kilometers from the outskirts of the city to the front line. Fighting is underway for Raiske. If it falls, the Russians immediately reach the outskirts of a fairly large, sizable city. A bit further south, an assault is underway on Oleksievo-Drushkivka. Russian forces are pulling up their flanks to complicate logistics for the Ukrainian armed forces in the city. This is the same tactic they used earlier when capturing Avdiivka, Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar, and other cities. Sure. Next, let's move to the Dobropilya sector. Yesterday we talked about how Russian forces are effectively cutting the city off from supply by taking control via drones of the T-0515 road, and today just look at how many strikes Russian drone operators have carried out against Ukrainian units trying to infiltrate the city in small groups. Russian assault troops are already storming several villages further east, Zoloty Kolodias, Rubizhne, and Russians have been spotted in Belozersky. The clear goal is to cut logistics here and stretch Ukrainian forces thin. In these small villages, Ukrainian fighters are holed up in houses, trying to infiltrate into Dobropilya itself. The assault on the city itself is in full swing. The city is in a semi-blockade from north and south. If Russian troops manage to break Ukrainian defenses here, I think the Russian offensive will then push further north, aiming to cut off logistics for Kramatorsk, Drushkivka, and Slovyansk. Russian drones aren't letting Ukrainian forces in the city carry out normal rotation or replenish ammunition. Let's move to the Zaporizhzhia axis, where the Russian offensive on Orikhiv continues. The main combat action is unfolding along the Verkhnya Tersa River, located northeast of Orikhiv. There's a clear Russian command intent to reach the eastern outskirts of the city and possibly to push a bit further north from the just captured Dolinka toward Omelnik, an extremely important Ukrainian stronghold in this sector. If it's taken quickly, Russian forces will be able to strike Preobrazhenka, Orikhiv itself, and, most importantly, push towards Zaporizhzhia with drones from that settlement. I think in that case the blockade of the city would essentially be fully secured, because if you look from the western side, Russian drone operators from the Shabarki and Pavlivka area have effectively already created a partial blockade of the Orikhiv-Zaporizhzhia road. I'd estimate only about 20–30% of rotation and ammunition deliveries are getting through to the Ukrainian forces defending Orikhiv. I think it's obvious to any ordinary observer that when you have such scarce personnel reserves and nothing to shoot back with, the question of the city's fall could be decided within 2 to 3 weeks. We'll keep close watch on this sector because after Kharkiv falls, a cascading collapse of Ukrainian defenses all the way to Zaporizhzhia itself could begin. North of this sector, in the Ternavate area, we have video confirmation of a Russian serviceman raising the flag of the Russian Federation in the settlement of Nishenka. Fighters of the Russian Vostok group of forces pushed Ukrainian forces out of the settlement and expanded the bridgehead for further advance towards Zaporizhzhia. The situation here is also very alarming. Russian troops are moving forward at a slow pace, and as time has shown, those hundreds of meters they cover per day add up to kilometers, eventually amounting to 50 to 60 kilometers of advance in some sectors over a year, a troubling trend. And now let's go briefly over the rear areas. We have several pieces of news there. One of the main stories was the destruction by Russian missiles of an ammunition depot in the settlement of Pishchanka, Dnipropetrovsk region. The footage captures the moment of detonation of a Ukrainian armed forces ammunition depot in the village of Pishchanka, which occurred this morning. Local authorities called the explosion a war crime, effectively placing responsibility on Ukrainian troops for yet another case of storing ammunition near residential buildings. The video and the report were published on the Telegram channel Osvedomitel. Near Odessa, Russian strikes on ports and cargo vessels continue. The work of Ukrainian ports has been paralyzed. According to Reuters, a backlog has formed near the Solina Canal with up to 70 ships in queue. As a result of Russian strikes, Ukraine's Black Sea ports are effectively blockaded, forcing part of grain exports to be redirected through the Danube. Currently, around 70 vessels are waiting to pass through the canal, while only 2 to 3 vessels a day can pass through Ukrainian ports. The delays are caused by a shortage of pilots, air raid alerts, and unfavorable weather conditions. The cost of a ship's downtime can reach $8,000 a day. A Su-30 or Su-35 aircraft shot down a Ukrainian Firepoint drone missile over the Black Sea using its GSH-31 aircraft cannon. All this shows that the Ukrainian Wunderwaffe, the Firepoint missile, doesn't pose such a serious threat to Russia's air defense system. Alongside this, the Russian side has moved to a new tactic of camouflaging combat aircraft in frontline areas. In a satellite image from the Ukrainian side capturing Saki Air Base in Crimea, another decommissioned Su-24 bomber has appeared, used as a decoy for Ukrainian drones. There have already been several such cases. It's clearly visible that this bomber is literally assembled from separate parts and components of Su-24S lying on the ground and simply covered with camouflage netting. A good attempt by Russia to reduce the chances of Ukrainian forces hitting Russian aerospace forces aircraft. Overnight, Ukrainian drones attacked the Efipsky oil refinery in Krasnodar region. Let's look at satellite images of the Efipsky oil refinery after the night attack. The joint gas and gas condensate processing unit was hit. Ukrainian forces also attacked Novoshakhtinsk in Rostov region. The target of the attack was the local oil refinery. Well, that's all, dear friends. We condemn all violence and military events in the world. Subscribe to the channel to be the first to know the latest news. Goodbye and see you tomorrow.